some of the different things that we're seeing within Homo erectus, um, seeing as we're now seeing some of these proofs in Homo erectus. Um, well, I mean, we've seen some of these proofs before, but we're seeing more. And so I thought it might be a good idea to go over a couple of the things that we see within Homo erectus. I don't have a whole lot of time today just because I've got things to do today, but I wanted to try and come in for a little bit at least and try and do a couple of things um, and see what we can come up with. I don't know. As we get started, there's a couple of things that I always like to go over in my lives. Um, Everybody gets a live capability on TikTok when they get to 1,000 followers. And I use my live capability to try and give information on paleoanthropology and human history and human prehistory. I have degrees in anthropology and archaeology, and I have degrees in medicine. I'm not coming in here, though, to give you a college degree. I'm coming in here to give you some basic stuff and some basic education. Hi, beautiful. So that you can take it further, so that you can use that beautiful brain that you have and take this basic education to a further step so that you can find out more information yourself. A big part of that is I truly believe that we learn better when we're interested in a subject and when we're putting our own effort into that subject than just listening to somebody rant about a subject. I use my life space to teach because I do not believe that education should be gatekept behind $40,000 a year paywall or gate kept behind huge language that's hard sometimes even for people with lots of degrees and extensive education to understand. I've always been very verbose. I have a broad vocabulary, and still there's times when I can read a paragraph and I have to look up every other word in the paragraph when it comes to things like science and paleoanthropology. Hello, Leanne. And so I feel it's important that people have basic information without having to pay for basic information and in a method and in a way that they can understand. There's only a few people in here now, so my next stuff will probably have to repeat a little bit later. I am an anthropologist. My field created the theory of race. My field has debunked the theory of race. Race was a theory that was created so that white men could continue to commit atrocity. And I don't deal with racism very well. Race being debunked, racism, of course, still exists. We still live in societies where many of our countries are founded on systemic racism. And it's important that we talk about race and we talk about the fact that it doesn't exist. And we talk about culture and we talk about ethnicity, which are two things that absolutely do exist. So I talk about these subjects a little bit. We go over why race doesn't exist scientifically and biologically. And we go over these different things within my lives, and we'll go over some of them today. It's important, though, I don't deal well with people being racist. If you're racist in my chat, you're not going to like my response. The same thing with phobias based on gender and in desire. Biologically, we have three sexes, not two. And gender is a completely different thing. And throughout the course of human prehistory and paleoanthropological studies show that the idea of gender being binary and gender roles is a relatively new thought process. And the idea of you being able to dictate somebody else's sexuality is a really new thought process. And so I don't deal well with those kind of behaviors in my chat. And so if they come up, I'll deal with them, but you won't like my dealings. So I ask you to kind of keep them somewhere else. If you want to talk about why you believe race exists or spout your racist ideology, get 1,000 followers and do it yourself. Not in my space. Same thing with phobias based on gender and desire. So that's what I ask in my space. I'm doing this as an act of love. This is an act of love. I believe that everybody should have knowledge. I don't believe knowledge should be held from people. And to prevent my agoraphobia so I can leave my house, I'm trying to get people to understand a few things about ourselves scientifically and biologically. This is very much because I love humanity. I ask that in me doing this act of love and me being kind, and I do my best to be kind to everybody, even if you're being shitty to me, that you come to me with kindness in return, that you're not being shitty to me. I'm not going to deal with it very well either. So you probably won't like the return. And then you'll probably melt and throw a tantrum and try and block me. And then it just always gets, thrown out of weird places. So I ask that you come kindly. If you think that I'm wrong about a subject, you're free to tell me that I'm wrong because so and so in this scientific journal stated this instead. You're absolutely free to bring evidence that you have. You always should bring evidence that you have, yet you are not free to just call me a liar. I'm not. And I provide sources for my stuff, and you're not going to come in here and treat me like shit, right? So those are kind of my rules in my room. This is my space. This is my room. This is Sarah's. We treat Sarah with respect in Sarah's space. Um, so I'll probably have to go over them again if we get to a lot of viewers in here and it gets really nasty. I try to make sure that comments stay on. A lot of times you can get a lot of education from people in the comments. There's a lot of scientists in here. There's a lot of indigenous people in here. There's a lot of knowledge in my space that comes from other people. I learn things all the time in this space. So do like to leave the comments on those so that people can get that knowledge, so that people can have those conversations, so that I can learn more and so that other people can learn more. If it becomes shitty and people are uncomfortable, it becomes an unsafe space. I will turn the comments on. Hello, everybody. I will turn the comments off, but I will turn them back on at intervals so that people can actually ask questions, because asking questions is important to learning. Again, I probably won't be here long today. I've got some stuff I've got to clean. I don't like to clean. So I've got to do some housework and I've got a few other things that I've got to do today. So I probably won't be here for very long, but I wanted to make sure that I came in and gave some information. As the picture behind me shows, today's topic of conversation is going to be about Homo erectus, and it is going to be about some of the other things around Homo erectus's timeline and the different things going on in those timelines. Absolutely sleepy. I'm not sure what that comment definitely shows is. Just, was it because I don't clean? Actually, my background here looks pretty clean. You can't see the boxes that I still haven't unpacked. Been here since May. But I wanted to talk today about a few specific things with Homo erectus that we see, because it's important as we're learning to understand different things about humanity prior to us. No, I'm protective of my digital space because we should all be protective of our space and set boundaries. That's healthy. We don't do it a lot. And many of us are trained to not. Many of us are trained that setting boundaries is a bad thing. Many of us are trained that we shouldn't be protective of our space. But I'm not she, I'm she, he, or we, just so you're aware, right? I'm protective of my digital space because I'm presenting boundaries. They're healthy boundaries. Every boundary that I've just stated is a healthy boundary. And it is a boundary that you should be enacting with pretty much everybody else. All the boundaries that I've stated are very basic boundaries. Don't be a shithead and treat people with kindness. That's like a really basic set of boundaries, like bare fucking minimum of how we should be treating other people. It should not be something that I have to come in here and state. And yet it is something that I have to come in here and state because, as anybody who has been here for any length of time will attest, it's quite frequently the opposite. And so I have to state those things up front. Those are healthy, basic boundaries that we should all have. My agoraphobia is because of the fact that when I go in public, white men like to attack me and assault me. And so I don't go in public because white men think that it's okay to attack and assault me in public. That's why I'm agoraphobic and getting agoraphobic. I'm combating the agoraphobia, right? So, absolutely, I am setting healthy boundaries in a space because they're important to set healthy boundaries in a space. And if those aren't basic boundaries that you see and you use with everybody around you, then you have an issue and you should check yourself. those are very basic, common human decency boundaries. I should not have to remind people that they exist, but I do, right? Um, so when we are looking at the different things that we're seeing with Homo erectus and the other, I have long-term funny how you think you know me. Like, how do you not think that I'm in a long-term relationship? Like, what makes you decide that I'm not getting laid every day? Like, fuck off. I do sometimes, I don't sometimes. And the reason that I don't sometimes is because there's a lot of education that can come out of my responses for people. Because a lot of times my responses will actually give somebody else something that they were looking for that they needed, right? And so I do and I don't. It just depends. And it also depends on where my head's at, whether or not I do or I don't, right? Um, when we're looking at Homo erectus, what we're looking at is the species. It's kind of the grandfather species of all of us. Homo erectus is a species. It's about 2 million years ago, or 2 million years old. And Homo erectus is the species that pretty much all the other Homo species come from. They come from either a mix of different subspecies of Homo erectus, or they come from Homo erectus directly coming forward and evolving into a new species. And Homo erectus is one of the species that is around when we start. And so it is thought that they're probably almost a parent grandparent species, right? And so we're going to talk about a couple of things that we see within them. They are the first species that gives us a lot of the tools that we have today. Um, that didn't work very well, did it? Much better. So when we're looking at Homo erectus is roughly 2 million years old. Last year, we saw this article that came out that talked about, and everybody on TikTok was talking about it and all over everywhere, all the platforms. A human tooth at 1.8 million years ago in the country of Georgia. Um, this human tooth at 1.8 million years ago in the country of Georgia is a Homo erectus tooth. Anything that falls underneath the genus Homo is a human. So when we look at something like Homo denisovan, Homo neanderthal, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo florensis, these are all human. The genus is Homo, and the species is Neanderthal, erectus, denisovan, florensis, right? So when we look at these different species, what we're seeing is different species of human that we either lived alongside of or that we descended from, right? So Homo erectus is 2 million years old in its timeline on the planet, and yet they make it out of the continent of Africa into Eurasia by 1.8 to 1.9 million years. So 100 to 200,000 years after their start of a species, they are out of Africa and they're kind of moving across the globe. Our newest evidence shows that Homo erectus makes it to every continent except for probably Antarctica. We haven't found Homo erectus or anything on Antarctica, so I'm going to assume that they didn't make it down there. But we have found evidence of Homo erectus in Turtle Island, which is North America. Evidence of Homo erectus are species that speciate from Homo erectus, like Neanderthal speciates from Homo erectus, in Turtle Island, North America, and Abayala, South America. We've also found evidence of Homo erectus making it to Australia and speciating in Australia. The Homo florensis finds that we have on the island of Flores in Indonesia is Homo erectus making it to the island of Flores, across water into this island. It is thought that Homo florensis comes from a subspecies or a child species of Homo erectus called Homo ergaster. And then we see that in the island of Luzon in the Philippines, there's another species that is speciated from Homo erectus, or one of the subspecies of Homo erectus, like Homo ergaster, into the species Homo luzonensis. This was a find that came out last year, I think, or maybe the year before. When we're looking at this, we can see evidence of them crossing water. We can see evidence of Homo erectus crossing water and making it into other spaces that they had to actually cross water to get to. Tureji, the ending of that word is considered a slur. You can use the word aboriginal, but the INES is considered a slur by the people that it is attributed to. So they request that you use Aboriginal instead or Indigenous Australians instead. When we are looking at Homo erectus's ability to cross water, we can literally see that they're making it across the globe. Again, the island of Flores is in the Wallace Trench in the Wallace Trench is between Southeast Eurasia and the continent of Australia. The Wallace Trench is so deep that it has never been above sea level. So any islands below that or continents below that, and any islands within it must have had a water crossing to get to. You have to have crossed water to get to these islands. So when we're looking at Homo florensis in the island of Flores in Indonesia, this is absolutely evidence of Homo erectus crossing water. The same thing with Homo luzonensis. There are, to my current count, 3 sites here in Turtle Island and Abiyala that predate 130,000 years ago, which are human occupied sites. There is a Ceruti mastodon site, which is 130,000 years ago in San Diego, California. There is the Calico site that is also in California. And then there is the Heotloco site in Venezuela. Fuck, I can't say words today. Venezuela, that is 250,000 years old. The Calico site in California is 200,000 years ago. And the Heotloco site in Venezuela is 250,000 years ago. All of these sites are sites that show human occupation. They have bifacial tools, so they show actually advanced tool makings in at least 2 of these sites. And all of these sites show people being here, right? When we're looking at the ability to make it across the globe, these sites, these 2 islands, the Moy Hill site in Australia, which is 120,000 years ago. Yes, absolutely. Yvonne, actually, if you go to the inwitaord.com site, and on that site, you'll see you'll see redating the Western or rewriting the Western Hemisphere. That's what it's worded at. Rewriting the Western Hemisphere is a tab up across the top. And under the site, rewriting the Western Hemisphere, you'll see pre-sapien finds, Western Hemisphere, and that's where you're going to find those 3 finds. And it will give you probably just 1 or 2 articles to each of them. Some of them are journal articles, some of them are not journal articles. They're all articles I'm trying to ensure that you have the ability to access or access. Okay, my words today are not working. So that will give you actually, instead of me trying to type out the name or you trying to, spell the name, you're going to find that the name, you're going to find sites that will connect you to it. And then you can like copy paste and go and Google more. And I encourage you to Google more. Anything that is only, you're only reading 1 or 2 articles on is not going to give you all of the information. So you definitely want to read 3 or 4 of the articles and dig in a little bit deeper. Each of these sites that I'm talking about, the Heotloco site, oh, I'm sorry, that's not Venezuela. That's in Mexico. I apologize. It's the Vascuelo that put Venezuela in my mind. So Heotloco is in Vascuelo in Mexico. There are 3 different datings on that site. One of the datings is the middle dating that they gave, like not time-wise dating, but in their, dated it here, dated it here, dated it here. The first dating that they found was 250,000 years ago. The second dating that they found is 40 to 50,000 years ago. And then the third dating that they have for it is 800,000 years ago. So the dating on Heotloco has been disputed and it has gone through different stages and there are different looks at it. If you read through the articles, when I'm reading through the articles, to me, they state that we are looking at least 200,000 years ago, just the way they're talking about the stratification of the layers and they're talking about these different ways that they dated it shows me that they are dating it correctly when they dated at least 250,000 years ago. The Calico site also has a couple of different datings. The main one, though, was 200,000 years ago, and this one is in California. And Leakey worked on the Calico site. Leakey and his wife, the Leakeys are who found Lucy. Like they are well known in like they probably the preeminent paleoanthropologists that we have throughout the course of history. And Leakey worked on the Calico site. And then the Cerruti Mastodon site is the last one on here. And this is the one that's come out very recently. And all the dating on the Cerruti Mastodon site is confirmed, and there is no dispute on the 130,000-year-old dating on the Cerruti Mastodon site. There are people that will state it looks like this, but I'm not sure yet. But nobody goes, they're wrong. That's not what it is. So the dating on the Cerruti Mastodon site at 130,000 years old is pretty definitive. And these are all going to be descendant species of Homo erectus, because when we look at Homo erectus and we look at Homo erectus making across the globe, Homo erectus speciates into different species in the different spaces it makes too. So we believe that Heidelbergensis and antecessor are probably those that predate or are the direct ancestors of Homo neanderthalis. Heidelbergensis and antecessor are both species that either are descendant species or are subspecies of Homo erectus. They are species that come from Homo erectus. The way I think of it in my mind is Homo erectus is the grandfather. The children of Homo or grandmother, the children of Homo erectus, Homo erectus is grandma Homo erectus. And then we have anti-Heidelbergensis and anti-antecessor and anti-ergaster and anti-Rudolfensis and a bunch of different aunties and uncles within these subspecies or children species of Homo erectus. And then we have our cousins like Neanderthal and Denisovan, who are the children of the subspecies, the descendant species of Homo erectus. So when we're looking at Homo erectus making it across the globe and making it into other spaces and speciating in those other spaces, we're seeing that what they're doing is they're adapting to that space. And in that adaptation in that space, they become a new species. They're adapting in isolation, which is what we have thought of for the longest period of time as being the main way of speciation. It is still the major way of speciation. We do now know that it's not how we as Homo sapiens speciated. It is, though, how we've seen most other species, especially most other species of humans, with the exception of Homo erectus, speciate as well. Speciation through isolation. And what this is when you have a group of Homo erectus and 30 of the 100-person group of Homo erectus leave the community and they travel out over the horizon to look for new things, and they end up in Georgia and they stay in Georgia and they don't go back to Morocco, they stay in Georgia. And because they're staying in Georgia and they're not going back and people aren't coming this way, that 30 people then end up becoming a new species. It takes about 100 generations for an adaptation to happen. It takes several hundred generations in isolation for a speciation to happen, right? So please don't use cap locks in my chat. We ask that we reserve those for mods. A. B. Take your God out of my chat. I don't deal with that narcissist. I don't like narcissists, so you keep your God somewhere else. And C, that's incorrect. Like all of it's incorrect. All of it's incorrect. But take your God out of my chat. I don't like narcissists. And please not clap locks. We save those for the moderators in our chat. Hello, hello. So when we're looking at speciation through isolation, what we're looking at is, sorry, I'm a male child sometimes. We're looking at speciation through isolation from Homo erectus, erect man. We're seeing that they speciate into other species in isolation outside. So you're going to see that they speciate into Heidelbergensis and antecessor, which then speciate into Neanderthal. Now, Heidelbergensis and antecessor are actually traveling back and forth, because we see that Heidelbergensis is also within Africa, and we see that antecessor is also within Africa. And these are two species that we also descended from. We descend from a convergence of several different species, so not just one, whereas we're looking at Neanderthal as most likely descending from antecessor. Though there is thought process that it could be Heidelbergensis as well, so maybe it is both antecessor and Heidelbergensis. It's important to understand when we're looking at the things that we call subspecies, of Homo erectus, that these subspecies of Homo erectus, um, we don't have genetics for them. We just have their skeletal morphology. And oftentimes we find several different species in the same band, the same community when we find them because of a cave collapse, because of a flood that has like washed them all. When we find them all together, we're looking at the different skeletal morphology and going, okay, so this one is antecessor, and this one is heidelbergensis, and this one is ergaster. Now, because we find them all in the same community, we believe that some of the paleoanthropologists out there believe that they are a subspecies of Homo erectus. Some paleoanthropologists call them different species, yet we're only naming them as different species based on the skeletal morphology because we do not have the genetics. We don't have any genetics from anybody other than us in our older finds of us. Currently, it's us, Neanderthal, and Denisovan are the only ones that we actually have DNA from. So, because of this, with our erectus and ergaster and antecessor, we do not know for certain. We're just going based on skeletal morphology. So, when we're looking at Neanderthal, we believe that Neanderthal comes from antecessor and heidelbergensis, having adapted in Western Europe from Homo erectus, right? We do have a dragon man now that is called Homo longi. We're not sure if Homo longi is a Denisovan yet. I can touch on that just a little bit in just a minute. So when we're seeing that Homo erectus is making it out and they're adapting in these areas and they're becoming Heidelbergensis and antecessor, and then they're becoming Neanderthal, we see that not only are they becoming Neanderthal in Western Eurasia, actually pretty much everything like mid Eurasia, Western Eurasia over. And then we see that they're becoming Denisovan in Eastern Eurasia. When we see Denisovan in Eastern Eurasia, we only have a few finds from Denisovan. We don't have a skull type of Denisovan. Most of our finds of Denisovan, not all, but most of our finds of Denisovan come from Denisova Cave in Russia. And most of our finds of Denisovan will fit in the palm of your hand. Like you can fit all, like, I think we have like 6 or 7 fragments of Denisovans, and the vast majority all fit in the palm of your hand. The mandible that we have does not fit together with all the other ones in the palm of your hand. Of the skull of a Denisovan, we have a mandible, and then we have like a chunk of the base of their skull. So we know that they speak. We know that they have verbal language, yet we do not have the top of their skull. So we're not sure if Longi, who we only have the top of their skull and we don't have any DNA from, is actually a Denisovan or it is another species. We've had Longi's skull since 1970, and we thought for a long time it was just a different morphology of a Neanderthal. So we're like going with that. Inwitator.com, see where it says sources on inwitator.com? That's my website. I compile bibliographies for you on that, so you can go to that site and find sources so that you can have sources, have links, right? And I don't provide them in here because TikTok doesn't do that. If you try to type inwitator.com into the comments, it won't it won't send it right. Like, just doesn't do that. TikTok doesn't like you to go to outside websites. So that's why I've compiled them on my own website. So we're seeing that as they're moving across the globe, they're speciating in these places that they go into, and then they isolate within these spaces. This is how we get Neanderthal, Denisovan, Florensis, Luzonzensis, Longi, and the different sites that we have within North America and South America, or Turtle Island and Abayala, and within Australia. We also have other species that have descended from Homo erectus within Africa that are significantly different when we look at Homo naledi. Unknown Cave of Bones just came out. Lee Berger is the lead paleoanthropologist who has worked on Homo naledi and the Rising Star Caves in South Africa find. And that is a beautiful documentary. It's on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, I suggest you do. There's some really cool fucking information going on with Homo naledi coming out right now. So what we know of, and they just discovered another species, 300,000 years old. It's the only other species that we've ever seen that has a flat face like us. It's 300,000 years old in East Asia. I want to say it's in China, but I can't remember exactly. And it is HLD6. So currently, alongside us in the fossil record, we see Neanderthal, Denisovan, Florensis, Luzonzensis, Longi, Naledi, and HLD6. When it comes to the subspecies of Homo erectus that predate us, there's roughly 14, and I can never remember the names of all of them. I just have a few of them, right? So when we are looking at Denisovan wasn't just the major. No, Denisovan is actually very localized. We've only got two sites that we have found Denisovan in, and we only have a few spaces on the planet currently of Homo sapiens where we see Denisovan genetics. So in Southeast Asia, we see Denisovan genetics. We see Denisovan in the islands of the South Pacific. We see it in Australians and Indigenous Australians, and we see it in Indigenous Albialians and Indigenous Turtle Islanders. That's where we see Denisovan now, right? And none of them are aggressive. None of them are aggressive. We're not even aggressive until 10,000 years ago. Violence is only 10,000 years ago in our species. So when we're looking at these other species, these are all children of Homo erectus as it makes it across the globe and it speciates into these different spaces. And we come in contact with these children. Every human on this planet has admixture from at least one other species of human, right? So the reason that Homo erectus is able to do this is because of the different things that Homo erectus has. When we look at Homo erectus is our first species that took a tool assemblages and changed it. They're not the first to develop tools. We thought for a long time that was Homo habilis, which is why we call him Homo habilis or handy man. Um, Yet we found out last year that it's actually Paranthropus boisei who develops the Oldowan tool complex and passes the Oldowan tool complex down to Homo habilis, and that in turn passes the Oldowan tool complex down to Homo erectus. I don't do history. This is not history. This is prehistory. It's science, sweetheart. So Homo erectus gets past the Oldowan tool complex from Homo habilis, or from Homo, well, probably a combination of Homo habilis and Paranthropus boisei, because our current understanding is Homo erectus comes from a convergence of Homo habilis and Paranthropus boisei and maybe Australopithecine. No, handyman is not so handy now. So Homo erectus takes these tool assemblages, and in taking these tool assemblages, they change them into something new. And this is where we start to see the Schulian hand axe come in. This is our first bifacial stone tool. So the Oldowan tool complex is comprised of yes, and that is Naledi that buried its dead. Comprises of very few things in the Oldowan tool complex. What you see in the Oldowan tool complex are what we call cobblestones and hammerstones. See you later, knives. And we see scrapers and cutting edged instruments. But the scrapers and the cutting edge instruments are not retouched and they're not bifacial, right? None that have Homo erectus admixture, we're all descended from Homo erectus. We have admixture from cousin species that are also descended from Homo erectus. So when we're looking at the tool complex, the hammerstones and the cobblestone is a flat stone that you place on the ground. You place something on top of it and you use a hammerstone to crush it. These are things that are seen in the Cerutomastodon site. This is done to break open the bones so that you can get bone marrow, which is a high calorie, high protein need for our body. It needs a lot of stuff for our body, and also to get tools from the bone because we have been using bone tools a lot longer than we think we have. The other thing that you see is you can create a stone tool by kind of flaking it off of another thing. This is called a core, and you hit it right on the outside and it will flake off and give you an edged instrument that you can use as a scraper or you can use as a knife for cutting, right? Violence predates religion, but it starts with stratification. It starts with possession of land. It's when we move from animism. When we're looking at the religion doubles it down. When we're looking at these stone tools, none of these tools are retouched and none of these tools are bifacial, meaning that they were cut on both sides or they were chipped off on both sides to make the tool. When we're looking at Homo erectus takes these Homo erectus takes these tools and it steps them forward. Instead of just using the hammerstones and the cobblestones and the single-edged scrapers and knives, they create the Acheulean hand axe. Now, the Acheulean hand axe is roughly 6 inches usually. The Acheulean hand axe has a space on the back end that's a little bit broader. It kind of has a bulbous to it, and you can hold this. And then it comes down into a point. It looks like an upside down teardrop when held right. And what it does is gives you a cutting or chopping surface, and it also gives you a scraping surface. When I look at Acheulean hand axes as somebody who's worked hides for the vast majority of my life, I see a scraper. Other people look at the Acheulean hand axe and they see a hand axe chopping. Okay, so when we look at this, this is our first advancement of stone tools. This is the first time any species on this planet looks at a tool and says, I can make that better. This is something that is unique, innate to us. This is something that is innately human. And this innately human trait is something that we get from Homo erectus. Only Homo species have done this. There are many different species on the planet currently today that use tools, that can make tools. Corvids can make tools to use. Monkeys can make tools to use. There are many different species on this planet today that adapt their surroundings and create homes for themselves within their surroundings, build a den, build a dam. There are many different species that can do these things. We are the first or the only species that is able to take the adaptations, those tools, or the adaptations to the environment, and then take them a step further. Your cutting edge is really cool, but I think if I do this, I can make it even cooler. And we see that Homo erectus is the very first to do that. When Homo erectus does this, this is this great leap forward. Hey guys, this great leap forward in our thought process, and this great leap forward in the way that humanity functions. Now, currently, we have this evidence that has come out that we have a 500,000-year-old wooden structure built by Homo heidelbergensis in Africa. And the 500,000-year-old wooden structure built by Homo heidelbergensis in Africa, because it's a Homo heidelbergensis human that we found in the find, like among the site we have found Homo heidelbergensis remains. So this site at 500,000 years old is basically Lincoln logging, right? It's cut and groove, right? Or tongue and groove. So you get that chop out like the old log cabins that we can picture in our minds, where you chop out a groove in a log and you chop out a groove in another log and you stack them. Okay. So when we're seeing this, we're seeing this other advancement in the way that humanity is able to sustain itself and adapt its adaptations. Personally, I believe this is one of those advancements that we actually get from Homo erectus, that Heidelbergensis is picking this up from Homo erectus, and that we've actually been building structures a lot longer than we like to think we have been building structures. So when we're looking at Homo erectus, we're seeing that the reason that Heidelbergensis has this is because of the fact that Heidelbergensis is a child of Homo erectus, and Homo erectus is coming up with these new ideas. We see that Homo erectus is the first to use fire, and not use fire, to keep fire, the first to have fire underneath their control to some extent, right? So there are going to be instances prior to Homo erectus learning how to control or keep fire, where maybe a cat or a monkey is in a tree when it's hit by lightning. The tree catches on fire, it bakes the monkey. Somebody goes, oh, fuck, that sounds good. I smell that. Let's eat that, right? Okay, so we're going to utilize fire that comes about in nature before Homo erectus learns how to control fire. But Homo erectus is the first to learn how to control fire. This is early science. Science is, I observe something in nature. I have a hypothesis or a thought of what that observation means. I have a prediction of what that hypothesis means. I test what I predicted. And if the testing proves true, it becomes a theory. If the testing proves false, it goes back to the hypothesis. So Homo erectus having the ability to control fire, having the ability to make fire or keep fire, is this extremely early science. And this is going back at least 1.5 million years old. We're seeing that Homo erectus has been using fire for this extended period of time. And the usage of fire gives us a lot of different things that carry down into us. And it is, in fact, Homo erectus's ability to use fire that gives you the ability to be on a phone today, right? Um, Homo erectus's ability to use fire gives us our bigger brains. Homo erectus's ability to use fire gave us the ability to temper metal and to create uh, metal objects. And the ability to create metal objects gets us up to the steam age and gets us up to the industrial age. And then getting up to the industrial age, all using fire because the industrial age uses fire like crazy, gets us into the technological age that we're in currently, right? So when we see this, we see that Homo erectus started using fire is the very first spark to where you're at today, right? So when we're seeing Homo erectus using fire, we're seeing that fire usage pre-digests cooking our food, pre-digests our food, which gives us a greater caloric intake, which is especially important uh, in utero children, neonate children, all the way up to the closure of the brain. Any extra calories that we have goes to brain development. Love you. So when we're seeing that ability to use fire and that ability to control fire is why you have the brain you have today. Uh, when we're seeing this, this also gives us different fluctuations or tool usages. So the Acheulean hand axe isn't something that you're going to put on the end of a spear. It's too big and it's awkward. Like there's no shaft, right? There's no place to put it into a shaft. So um, the Acheulean hand axe isn't going to go into a spear. Our first evidence of healing the injured is Neanderthals. It doesn't go as far back to our current knowledge as Homo erectus, right? Um, one of the first evidences of humanity is considered to be the ability to heal your dead or heal your wounded. Yes. There's also the concept that it is cave art, or the concept that it is burial of dead. All of these things kind of go together to get to our understanding of humanity. I'm not sure that we weren't doing those things. Absence of evidence does not equate evidence of absence, right? Like if there's no evidence, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means we have no evidence that it happens, right? So, while we have no evidence currently that Homo erectus healed their wounded, it doesn't mean that they didn't, right? Or healed their ill, it doesn't mean that they didn't, right? So, when we're looking at the because this is a Homo erectus, and the alleles for light skin don't start until 900,000 years ago. This Kinnis and Kinnis image is based on, I believe, Java Man, and Java Man is 1.5 million years ago. So the alleles for light skin were not around at the time that this human being was alive. And so, because the alleles for light skin are not around at the time that this human being is alive, this human being is absolutely a dark skinned human being. That's why they're dark. Um, so when we're looking at the tool usage for like hunting tools and stuff like that, we definitely see that having the ability to have fire actually gives us better hunting tools. The reason that this gives us better hunting tools is because if we're not using stone points and hunting tools, we need to create a point. And if you were one of those children who like to play outside, maybe you sharpened a stick into a point and then you tried to hit somebody with that stick. Maybe you're outside playing with one of your siblings, right? And when you try and hit something with that stick, you notice that the tip of that stick mushrooms out. And the mushrooming out of that tip is because you broke the integrity of the wood when you used a knife to sharpen it. Yet, if you were to take that same stick and you were to heat it and cool it and heat it and cool it by rolling it against or near the fire until it gets really hot and then rolling it away and then rolling it back and then rolling it away so that it's heating and cooling. This is called tempering. So you can temper that wood and it becomes harder so it's not going to bend or break when you're throwing it or stabbing with it. The other thing that you can do is you stick the point of that stick into the fire and you scrape it off on one of the rocks around the fire, and you can create a very fine, very sharp point that has a lot of integrity to it because you have a stick that is tempered, A, and B, you haven't broken the integrity of the wood by slicing through and breaking the integrity of the wood, right? I'm going to go ahead and answer that just because of the fact that it is a very important thing in today's thought process. So recently we have discovered the alleles for light skin come about 900,000 years ago. These alleles are possibilities are present in Heidelbergensis, and they're present in Antecessor. They are present in us in our first creation, though we don't show them to our knowledge in our first iteration as human. Um, and they are present in Neanderthal, where they tend to show more. We do believe that they come about 900,000 years ago through Erectus being in a space that has a low sun content environment, right? Um, Low sun. So light eyes comes before light skin because light eyes is more necessary than light skin. Low sun environment, you need less melanin in your skin. Not no melanin. Everybody has melanin unless you're albino, but less melanin in your skin so that the sun can get through, so that you can get vitamin D. But you can get vitamin D from other spaces. So it's not an adaptation that you have to have right away. Whereas a low light eye adaptation for lighter eyes is an adaptation that's way earlier. So we see that as Heidelbergensis and Erectus and Antecessor are all outside of Africa in Western Eurasia, they are starting to develop these alleles for lighter skin because of the environment that they're in. There's also some evidence that lighter skin actually provides heat, like it actually is warmer. So when we're seeing that adaptation for that environment comes about in Erectus and in Heidelbergensis and in Antecessor, and that they pass this on to Neanderthal. It should be understood that when we're talking about lighter and darker, we are not talking about extremely dark Kenyan versus extremely light Norwegian, right? We are talking about a range and a scale. So on the darker range, you can be anywhere from Saudi Arabian brown, right? And on the light to Kenyan dark, right? On the lighter phrase, you can be anywhere from Saudi Arabian brown to uh, Norwegian bright nor white, right? So it's a range. It is not a everybody is ultra light or everybody is ultra dark. The alleles for light skin showing up at 900,000 years ago and first going in Heidelbergensis and Neanderthal, they do not show up into us until later. So for Homo sapiens, our current understanding is that Homo sapiens starts at about 300,000 years ago, and we come from a convergence of many different species, Heidelbergensis, Antecessor, Ergaster, Erectus, all being some of these species. And in this convergence that creates us, we are here and we are here and we are here in these small groups, and then we converge to make one group and we become a species as a whole by about 125 to 135,000 years ago is when we converge to a species whole. So at this time, we are dark. And the reason that we are dark and we have tightly coiled hair and we have dark eyes is because of where we speciate. When we speciate um, in these areas, we're speciating in an area with very heavy sun content. The sun is always there, right? And so having a higher concentration of melanin in our skin is protecting us from UV and it's protecting us from overdosing in vitamin D. That does not mean that people who have dark skin or higher melanin content in their skin can't burn. They can absolutely burn. This is a protective layer. It does not completely erase all the damage that could possibly happen. So we see that we speciate as darker. We speciate with darker eyes because darker eyes are about high sun content. If you have heavy sun, the dark eyes actually prevents so much light from getting in. So you can actually go out into the high sun without it hurting you, right? Without giving you headaches, without having to squint, right? When we're looking at hair, there was a recent study that's been put out by a Black paleoanthropologist who also had a lot of experience in their youth with hair. And the study that they did showed that the reason that we speciate with 4C or tightly coiled, which is the more correct terminology, hair, is because of the lattice work that it creates and the shade that it creates. So tightly coiled hair creates this kind of shade over our head. And then that lattice work that it creates allows for the sun to blow through the lattice work and cool our skull. So, and therefore cool our brain. So these things are created in the ability for us to adapt to and live in the environment that we are in. because Homo erectus, like us, comes out of a convergence of species, they carry a wide variety of genes. And just like us, that wide variety of genes means that they're adaptable to the different spaces that they go into. So when Homo erectus goes into Western Eurasia, Homo erectus is able to adapt. That light skin gene comes out within Homo erectus. And when that light skin gene comes out within Homo erectus, they're able to pass it down to the other species that speciate from them, their other grandchildren, right? Um, they also pass down the genes for light eyes, the alleles for light eyes. The alleles for light eyes are low light adaptation. What it is that when you have less melanin in your eyes, more light comes in, right? And so trying to take light eyes into a high sun environment, it gives you headaches. You have to squint. It's hard to see. But having them in a low light environment means that you're better capable of seeing in low light, right? So when we are looking at that, what we're looking at is this movement of us as we come out from our, first of all, again, we're speciating in Africa. We get to this convergence of species within Africa. Yet, this timeline for a convergence of species, we're already interacting with the Neanderthals. So, at this time, it needs to be understood that because we're in mass glaciation, a maximum glaciation period, the sea levels are lower. And as long as the sea levels are lower, you see that the Arabian Peninsula is actually a part of Africa. The sea level there has dropped, and this is all one continent. It's not a separate continent. And so we are moving up into the Arabian Peninsula and into the Levant area as the Neanderthals are moving down because of the mass glaciation taking over their territories. And so they come into the Levant area at 150,000 years ago and the Arabian Peninsula at 150,000 years ago, at the same time that we're moving up into this area. Now, it's good to know that the Nile River has been like a hotbed of humanity for 3 million years. Homo habilis was along the Nile riverbed. Like Paranthropus boisei was along the Nile riverbed. The Nile riverbed has been a hotbed of humanity for the entirety of human existence, right? So when we're looking at that, we're seeing that already being near the Nile, going over into the Levant area, going over into the Arabian Peninsula area, this is not like it's a whole lot of change for us, right? This is home still, kind of. We meet up with Neanderthals around 150,000 years ago in this space. And when we meet up with Neanderthals at about 150,000 years ago in this space, we have not solidified as a species yet. We don't solidify as a species until 135 to 125,000 years ago. Until then, we are seeing that Homo sapien comes from I don't know why you say I'm not you. I mean, I know why you think I'm not you, but you don't know me, so you don't know. You don't know that my grandmother was brought here from Sudan on the Middle Passage, that I have pictures of my grandmothers, and you can tell. Okay. You don't know that I'm also Turtle Island Indigenous. You don't know that I'm also Australian. You don't know that I'm also Sami, that I'm also Japanese. You look at me and you see a white girl. I'm not a girl and I'm not white. I'm light. There's a difference. And we are all one species, or all of my ancestors could have banged each other to get to me. It's just not how it works. Okay. So, when we are looking at this movement, we are looking at when we're looking at this movement, we're looking at this space of time where you're seeing this convergence. Again, we see us coming out of this convergence. We see that Neanderthals coming down within are meeting up with us and becoming a part of us even before we kind of end this convergence. When we see this, we see that Neanderthal genetics are being passed into us. Now, two species that have recent common ancestors can breed. They don't often have children that are fertile. They don't often have children that survive being born, right? So when we're seeing that two different species can breed. not as easily as Homo sapiens can breed with each other because we all bang each other all the time. Um, when we're seeing this convergence, we're seeing that, first of all, we don't see a Y DNA or Y chromosome for Neanderthal at all, not even in Neanderthals. We see a Y chromosome for sapien in Neanderthals, and we see a Y chromosome from, do you know the people from the mountain of the Caucasus are dark? Just saying. Like Caucasian is brown. Caucasian is darker than me. Um, so when we're seeing the meeting up with the Neanderthals and this convergence of these two different species that are intermixing with each other, we're seeing that the Neanderthal DNA is going back into Africa and the sapien DNA is going with the Neanderthals up into Eurasia. We're seeing that it is only women who are able to pass on. It is only those who carry two X chromosomes who are able to pass on DNA. We're not seeing that there is an X chromosome or a Y chromosome from, we don't find a Y chromosome from Neanderthals anywhere. Okay. And all of this, again, is stuff that is compiled in the bibliographies on the inwitaorg.com website, right? Have a great one. So when we're seeing this mixture of us with Neanderthal, we're seeing that the DNA from Neanderthals gets in us everywhere. They get in us in all of Africa except for two spaces. Two communities in Africa do not have Neanderthal DNA. They have ghost species within them, but they do not have Neanderthal, and that is the Yoruba population and the Kwe population. Everywhere else in Africa has Neanderthal DNA. Everywhere else across the globe has Neanderthal DNA. The percentage of Neanderthal DNA varies, just like the percentages of other DNA varies. This is before we're leaving Africa and moving up into Eurasia. So this is roughly 150,000 years ago that we meet up in this space. We haven't converged as a species. We finally converge as a species when we see us moving out of the Levant area. We see us moving out of the Levant area roughly 50,000 years ago. Recent dating has pushed us back to roughly 52,000 years ago, to my understanding. We do see that in indigenous Australia have been there for about 70,000 years. So they are some of the first to make it out of the Levant area and across Southeast Eurasia and into Australia. We see that at 50,000 years ago, when everybody starts migrating out and moving across the planet, first of all, they are coming in contact with other human beings that are there. This means that this is immigration and migration. Colonization means replacing somebody's government with your government. So when you are colonizing something, you're taking your governmental structure into another space, conquering that space, and replacing their government structure with your government structure. So this is not colonization. This is migration and immigration. It needs to be understood that the start of violence happens at 10,000 years ago. Okay. We see the rise of violence at 10,000 years ago, and we see the rise of violence associated with land ownership. We see that the movement out of Africa, out of the Levant area, up into Western Eurasia, across the globe, starting at 50,000 years ago, does not have violent interaction with the other people there. Morena loves Robert. That is a slur. INES is a slur. Aboriginal is the preferred term. And 40,000 years ago is not correct on any level. So when we're seeing this movement, they were there before Indonesia was there. 1 second, I need to grab something. Pardon me, my lips get dry. It becomes hard to talk. So as we're seeing this movement across, we're not seeing a movement that involves harming people, right? We're not seeing, we have a couple mods in here. Is it getting bad? We are at like 140. I can go ahead and turn it off. Race doesn't emerge into conflict until after the 1400s. Race is a later form of othering. So when we see this movement out, we're not seeing this interaction with the other species that are already outside of Africa, that have speciated outside of Africa, which is supporting the multi-regional theory. When we see this coming in contact with them, we see this coming in contact as being very benevolent. We know that when we are in the Levant area in the Arabian Peninsula, there are two separate caves, one of Homo sapiens and one of Neanderthals, and they're literally like a 5-minute walk from each other. This was where we lived for 100,000 years. 100,000 years, we lived a 5-minute walk from Neanderthals. We got all this information from them. We got all this genetics from them. By the time we meet up with Neanderthal, there are roughly 10,000 as a species. There's only 10,000 of them left. They're interbred, they are inbred. They are, marrying their cousins. Well, I think I have to like drop my, I think I have to go through the moderators. I've had like 30 moderators since the very beginning because like it gets so bad in here. I'm not sure. No, that's not what I wanted to do. So when we're seeing that, there we go. When we're seeing that mixture and that coming across together, what we're seeing is that as they are coming across that timeline together, there's no evidence of violence. There's no evidence of being harmful to each other. There's no evidence of hurting each other. All evidence, in fact, comes from the idea that thank you for already in here. That's weird. With the idea that we were actually mixing with them in a very benevolent, very loving, very communal way, which makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to explain to you why this makes more sense. 1 second. Sorry, trying to do something here. Okay. So when we look at our start, absolutely. Yes, because that debunks the theory of race. Would I discuss the concept of genetic diversity in Africa more diverse than between groups than outside? So when we were looking at race as a theory that comes about in the 1800s, when we're looking at race as a scientific theory that comes about in the 1800s, because the idea and the concept of a race comes about, but prior to that, the concept of race comes about with the Bible, or with the doubling down of the Bible, roughly the start of the 1400s. In the end of the 1400s, when we see that Europeans start attacking Turtle Island and Abiyala and start their invasion, we see that the concept of race starts to double down, and they take that concept of race as a biblical concept. They take it as the children of Hain are being marked because the dark skin is considered to be a mark of Hain. And this is how they are able to justify the enslavement of African people and the attempted genocide of Abiyalian indigenous people and Turtle Island indigenous people. When the 1850s, 1840s start rolling around and the discovery happens of the theory of evolution and this idea that evolution is real, right? That that we're not just 6,000 years old, that God didn't create us all, that we evolved. When this comes into play, Europeans need something to actually like justify what they've been doing, right? Well, if we're all the same, then how could I have been so cruel to these other beings, right? If we're all human, then how am I able to be so cruel to these other human beings? And so to justify their atrocities, what they do is they create this theory of race and this theory of eugenics alongside the theory of evolution. The theory of race states that your phenotype dictates your genotype and it dictates different things about you. If you are of one phenotype, you are going to be less intelligent. You are going to not feel pain. You are going to be a harder worker and you're going to be better at sports. If you are of another phenotype, you're going to be more intelligent. You're going to feel things more. You're going to be better at this. You're going to be more this and blah, blah, fucking blah. It's all a crock of shit. It is a theory. Theory is something that has been tested and that is continuously tested. And when the tests start proving false, it is no longer a theory, and that theory has been debunked. So this is a theory that was debunked. So when we get to the advent of DNA and the ability to test DNA and the ability to do things like the whole genome project, the whole genome project looks at the entirety of Homo sapiens genome. And when they look at the entirety of Homo sapiens genome and they start looking at the DNA from many different groups around the planet, many different primary populations around the planet, what they realize is that there is more genetic diversity within primary populations than there is between two separate primary populations, right? So again, the theory of race being created to justify atrocity. It doesn't really have a whole lot of scientific tools being used within it. Most of the tools being used within it, except for maybe calipers, most of the tools being used with it are in fact artistic tools. Like they paint a bunch of different colors of paint on a piece of paper and they hold it next to your face. And depending on what paint match you match up with, depends on where you go, right? Race is not in medicine. Race is not scientific. It has been disproven. I'm an anthropologist. That's like literally my field. My prior field was medicine. Okay. And it has been disproven. It doesn't exist. Racism is in medicine. They, in fact, recently proved that the things that they think like more Black people have heart problems, they realize that more Black people don't have heart problems. More people redlined into certain districts have heart problems because the district itself has different chemicals and different issues that are being put into those districts that create those heart problems. So it has nothing to do with the color of their skin or where their ancestors are from, but instead has everything to do with the structural racism within the United States. Race does not exist. And I am explaining it to you right now how they debunked the theory of race. Theories can be disproven. They are factual until they are disproven. They can be disproven, and the theory of race has been disproven. And the way that they disproved the theory of race is they proved that you are more genetically diverse within primary populations than you are between primary populations. And what this means is if you belong to a primary population of Khoi people in South Africa. Okay, that is the primary population that you are in, and you and your neighbors, this community that you live in, there's not a whole lot of outside genetics in this community. You guys have always been there. You know what? Actually, let's do it this way. They recently rediscovered an indigenous tribe within Africa that they thought had been genocided. Right? They recently discovered that it is still there. The population doesn't have a lot of outside genetics. They disappeared. They didn't think that they were there. The genetics of that population are more genetically diverse between neighbors than they would be genetically diverse from the Basque population, which is also another isolated primary population that has not had a lot of outside influence. Now, why? I want you to think of this logically. Why are we more genetically diverse from the people we live next to than we are from people across the planet? Because inbreeding is bad. It creates mutations. And if we have, say, 100 genes, which is not the correct number, but 100 genes in our entirety of our genome, and every human being gets 25 genes, and me and my next door neighbor both get genes 1 through 25, and our children marry, genes 1 through 25 are going to mutate. Yet if me and my next door neighbor, I get genes 1 through 25 and my children get genes 1 through 25, and my next door neighbor's children get genes 75 to 100, the genetic diversity between my children and their children means that when they mix, when they create the next generation, there's less mutations. So we know currently that there is more genetic diversity within a primary population than there are between primary populations. That is the literal scientific census structure that disproves race. And we know that the Khoi people of South Africa are the original population of Africa has Neanderthal, just so you know. The Khoi people of South Africa are the original population. They are the oldest population of Homo sapien. And the reason that we know that the Khoi people of South Africa are the original population of Homo sapien is because the Khoi people possess all of the genetics that we can find within Homo sapien. Every gene that is a Homo sapien gene is found within the Khoi population of South Africa. And so we know that they are the original population of Homo sapiens. So That is how we disproved race as a theory. That is how we know that race is not a biological construct, but actually a colonial construct. It is a construct that is developed and invented to justify atrocity, to justify genocide, to justify the transatlantic slave trade. So when we're looking at that, we have to understand that race does not exist. But we're going to take it back. Okay. We're going to take it back a little bit because we are talking more about those who predate us than we are talking about us currently. Again, as we are moving outside of Africa as sapien, we are absolutely meeting up with Neanderthals, living side by side with Neanderthals in a loving environment for 100,000 years and taking Neanderthal genetics back into Africa. All of Africa has genetics from Neanderthals with the exception of the Kwai population and the Yoruba population. Every other space in Africa has Neanderthal DNA. And this is prior to colonization, meaning this is from remains found in spaces prior to colonization. Neanderthal DNA to about 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA. And this is because of the fact that there is this 100,000 year period of mixture within the Levant area and the Arabian Peninsula that at this time frame are actually still a part of the continent of Africa. And we have never stayed in one place for any specific length of time. We move. We like to move. We're curious. We want to go over the next horizon. We want to see what's there. Okay. And because we like to move and we are curious and we go over the next horizon, we come in contact with others. Now, since we come out of a convergence of several different species, when we start, we don't see other species as being different. If your grandmother is a Heidelbergensis and your mother is an antecessor and your father is an ergaster, you are looking at 3 different species of human as your parentals and grandparentals. You're not seeing those differences. We don't see the idea of othering, the idea of hating another human being until 10,000 years ago. We don't see violence. We mix with the Neanderthals because the Neanderthals at this point of time are such a small species. There's only 10,000 of them left. They've gone through 2 near extinction events in the 600,000 years of their existence. And so when they see us, they go, oh, new genes. Hey, fuck me. I don't want to screw my aunt. She looks like my aunt. You look fun. Let's have babies. That's what the Neanderthals do with us. And we go, oh, you're new. Huh? I know what everybody else looks like. You look new. How do you go? Right? We are a very sexual species and we really like to make babies with everything we come across. Right? And so as we're moving outside of Africa, the Levant area, the Arabian Peninsula area, and moving across the planet, that is what we do. There is no violence in these meetings. There is no evidence of violence in these meetings. There is, in fact, evidence of us breeding with them, of us living with them. The word tribe denotes a community based on genetic lineage. The word band denotes a community based on need. And when you're looking at early Homo sapiens and early any human, you are looking at people who need more people in their group. We need at least 30 people to have a sustainable community to be able to subsist and not actually get hurt by predators, not actually, well, first of all, we personally have to have community to give birth, and we personally have to have community to raise our children. All of these other species seem to be very similar in needing to have community. And so when we look at RBG, I don't know that one. When we're looking at this and we're looking at us moving across the globe, we're not looking at other people and going, there's something weird about you and I don't like it. I mean, even today, something weird about you generally means let's hit it. Like, oh, you look different. Oh, you look fun. Like, you don't look like me, right? How many people out there that you know who love contrast or like the geeky looking person or like the person that doesn't look like the cookie cutter, right? It's all over the place, right? There is evidence that Denisovan and Neanderthal mix first. Yes, they come in contact with each other first. Both are much older than us. So Denisovan and Neanderthal are around for at least 100,000 years together before we even start as a species, right? So there is evidence that they mix first. And in fact, the first Y DNA that we see in Neanderthals is not a Neanderthal Y DNA, is in fact a Homo Denisovan Y DNA, right? So again, when we're looking at Homo erectus moving across the globe and speciating, we're looking at Homo erectus taking many different tools with them. Now, because they're moving across the globe and speciating, and because they're cousins for us, we tend to love them when we come along them, right? Um, and they have the same things that we do because we all get those from Homo erectus. Valentino, the inwitator.com site has links to a lot of different alpha male doesn't actually exist. Alpha males in wolves only happen when in captivity, and what it is that somebody in the and never the wolves in captivity are usually not related, and so there's one member of the community that goes, I need to protect and defend us from this predator that has us captured. And so they step up to protect and defend because they're in captivity. It's not something that we see in nature. Alpha is not something that we see in nature. There's no presence of alpha males in humanity prior to this current iteration of stupidity that we're dealing with. And in fact, all evidence shows that women were hunting as much as not more than men. And by the time we start actually having violent interactions like war, that women are warriors as much as men are warriors. There is no thought process of gender roles early on. Alpha male doesn't exist. It's actually a very toxic thought process, and it only happens in a toxic environment. Alpha male only comes about in a toxic environment. So it's definitely one of those things that it doesn't exist. Sorry, that one came. I have to, some of them I just have to. So erectus moving across the globe, taking these different things across the globe. That's not what I said. There's not an alpha male out there that calls himself alpha male that you want to lead you. Anybody that calls himself an alpha male, just like any guy who calls himself a dominant, is actually weak. And they're using that to maintain control over you because they need to maintain control over somebody else because of their insecurities and their weakness. You do not want anybody who claims to be an alpha leading you. Anybody who claims to be an alpha and is trying to lead you is probably somebody who has some serious mental dysfunction, needs to be in control, and is most likely to devolve into abuse because they are not a natural leader. They are certainly not an alpha because that doesn't exist. And instead, what they are doing is doing everything they can to maintain control over other people because of their own internal insecurities. Right? So I did not say that there were not leaders. I said that the leaders were alpha males because alpha male is something that is a result of a toxic environment. Yeah, domestic wolves, as in captivity. So when we are looking at this movement across the globe, right? When we're looking at this thought process of this movement across the globe, what we're seeing is that all the interactions, well, first of all, when we're looking at Erectus moving across the globe, we're looking at the fact that Erectus's tools and the Erectus thought processes they have. This picture is a Kinnis and Kinnis image. When you are using an image, as long as you provide a link to or a knowledge of the site, you're welcome to use it. And that's underneath the tools that I use on the website. So you can actually go to Kinnis and Kinnis's website. When we're looking at Homo erectus moving across, they're taking fire with them. They're taking a new method of tool making with them, and they're taking clothing with them. They're also taking vocal speech. Now, everything on this planet communicates. Trees communicate, plants communicate, dogs communicate, birds communicate. Everything on this planet communicates. Vocal speech. Verbal syllabic speech like we have is something that we do see within Homo erectus. We see it within all species that descend from Homo erectus as well. So they're taking a new form of tool usage. They're taking clothing. They're taking shelter. There are many different ways that one can create shelter. Most people aren't going to go across the horizon when they don't know that there's a place to shelter themselves across the horizon. So you're not going to migrate from cave to cave thinking that, you're going to find a cave across the next It's not, Gus. Thinking that you're going to find a cave across the next horizon. We are at like 300 people. Let me go ahead and redo this. And then I'm probably not going to, well, I'll stay until 3. So anybody who gets 1,000 followers gets a TikTok live space. I personally use my TikTok live space as a paleoanthropologist, as a historian, as somebody who studied medicine half of my life, to educate other people on information. A little bit pesky, that's kind of what we're touching on. As a space to give information and to give education. Um, I don't believe that education should be kept gate kept behind a $40,000 a year paywall, which is what I paid for mine, right? Or at least one of mine. I have several. I don't think that education should be gate kept behind a $40,000 a year paywall or behind language that is very difficult, even for people who have extensive vocabularies to parse out. So I come in here and try and give some base knowledge education on the things that I have knowledge in and the things that I have degrees in. That base knowledge education, again, it's basic, it's not advanced. You need to go other places for that. Unfortunately, I don't have the time or the mental capacity to put that much effort into it. I do compile my sources on my inwitaor.com site. This is my personal website where I put bibliographies because you all want sources. I don't blame you for wanting sources. Those sources are not a thesis level sourcing. They are sources that you should go to and go, oh, the Loca site in Mexico is 250,000 years old. Now let me find more information on the Loca site. So they are bases for you to find more information. I personally believe, and studies show, that people learn better when they're finding their own information, when they're asking questions, and when they're digging on their own. So I'm just giving you some information so that you know it's out there so that you can go and dig a little bit deeper. In my space, we've already talked about the fact that race has been debunked. Race does not exist. Racism exists. Ethnicity exists. Culture exists. But race is a biological thing, does not exist scientifically. My field created the theory. My field debunked the theory. It does not exist. I'm not going to deal with your racism in my chat at all. We've already discussed why race has been debunked. It doesn't exist. I'm not going to deal with your racism in my chat. The other thing that I do not deal with in my space, and this is my space, like it or not, this is my space. TikTok gave it to me, my room, my rules, my boundaries. The other thing that I do not deal with within this space is phobias based on gender and desire. If you have phobias based on gender and desire, that's you issue. It's not a me issue, and I don't want to hear about it. There are 3 biological sexes, not 2, and you don't get to gender anybody else based on your perception because that's bullshit behavior. Bullshit behavior. So you can take your racism or your phobias based on gender desire and scroll your little ass on. If you have things, one second, I'll go ahead and no, please. I was going to answer that one. I was going to answer that one. If you have things that you disagree with on me, please go ahead and tell me. Hey, Witta, I know something that states this, and so I think that what you're stating is incorrect because this article, this anthropologist, this person states something else, right? Because I don't know everything, don't want to know everything. That's a lot of fucking information to cram into one tiny little goddamn head. So I don't know everything. And there are going to be times that I might not know the newest information. I'm never lying to you. I'm always giving you information that I've read, that I've known, that I've compiled. That doesn't mean it's always the correct information or it's always the latest factual information. So if you have things that show that it's wrong, tell me, show me. Hello, Witta, this information says differently. Don't just tell me I'm wrong and don't just tell me I'm a liar because you have issues, not me at that point. And I ask that you will come at me with the kindness that I'm coming at you with. This is an act of love. This is an act of trying to ensure that other people have education. This is an act of trying to help you figure out how to be okay in a very sick and very ill society so that maybe, half of us don't fucking, like off ourselves within the next year, right? Like, so this is an act of love. And I ask that you return the kindness. Do not come at me shittily. It's not okay, right? These are boundaries that I'm putting in place. If you feel the need to break people's boundaries, scroll the fuck on. You are the problem. Go see a counselor. with all of that, telling people I'm not going to deal with your phobias based on gender desire is an act of love. It's maintaining a safe space for myself as a two-spirited individual and for anybody else in my space. If you feel the need to propagate hate, if you feel the need to be shitty to other people based on your religion, based on your thought processes that tell you that you're superior, then me calling you out on it is not an act of hate. It is, in fact, an act of love for everybody, including you. Maybe you don't know that you're being a shitty human being, right? So, if it gets really bad, it might be getting really bad. We'll turn off the comments and we'll go back to the conversation. Um, I try to keep the comments on because of the fact that the conversation being on means that people get more education. I learn stuff in these comments every day. You should learn stuff in these comments every day, right? So, the Stone Age versus civilized society. Are you aware that the Europeans lived in squalor and filth, and Turtle Island indigenous people actually lived in clean cities of millions of people? Are you aware that Turtle Island indigenous people and Abiyalian indigenous people, when the colonizers arrived, had advanced medicine and advanced science that the colonizers did not have? Are you aware that when the colonizers arrived in Turtle Island and Abiyala, they documented these advanced medicines and these advanced sciences? And they also documented the fact that Turtle Island and Abiyala were tended gardens from coast to coast, from north to south, from east to west. Tended gardens that maintained in Turtle Island between 80 and 100 million people, and tended islands that maintained vast populations in Abiyala as well. And these vast populations, having advanced medicine and advanced science, had very clean cities. The Europeans were all very shocked when they walked through these beautiful, clean cities and saw a lack of feces on the streets because the Europeans lived in squalor. They threw their feces out their window onto somebody's head. They all suffered from cholera because they were all taking dumps in their drinking water. And they had ignored science and medicine for roughly 1,000 years by 1492 because Christianity told them that science and medicine was questioning God and you couldn't question God. So living in the Stone Age was way healthier. The first advent of steel, the first advent of metalsmithing actually caused climate destruction 4,000 years ago. Okay. The first advent of monoculture agriculture caused climate destruction at 10,000 years ago. These things that you think are advanced are, in fact, backward steps, thought processes that were debunked and proven to be faulty in their very first utilization, and yet we are still utilizing them because of somebody's fucked up ego. Okay. And you thinking that that's what makes somebody civilized is the problem. Climate destruction, as in the fertile river valley that the first agricultural based city was built in Amman in Jordan, and Ghazal, was turned into a desert wasteland in 300 years because they had stripped out everything from the biome. They had stripped out all the nutrients and all the environment around them. And monoculture actually causes climate destruction. It strips all the nutrients from the soil and turns very rich, fertile soil into wasteland, desert that you can't grow anything in. So when we're looking at that, it's important to understand that the Stone Age was actually more advanced than what was going on across the water at that time. And that what we considered advanced civilization currently today was actually very destructive and very disease ridden, and there was very little that was advanced about it. The three biological genders are male, female, and intersex. Intersex does exist as a gender. It makes up roughly 2% of the population. To compare, roughly 2% of the population is redhead, and roughly 2% of the population is green-eyed. So roughly 2% of the population being intersex. You see a lot of redheads when you go out. I'm damn pretty sure of it. Same thing with green-eyed people. So you actually see a lot of intersex individuals when you go out every day. You're just unaware of it, right? So intersex would be somebody who has maybe 3 X's, maybe X null, maybe XYY, maybe XXXY. Intersex exists within our population. Many times, intersex individuals will display one set of internal organs and a different set of external organs. Let me know if you can't hear me anymore. I just had a phone call come in and it will mute me. So when we're looking at that, we actually see that there are three biological sexes within us. There are three biological sexes within many other animals as well. The idea of biological sex being binary is a very recent thing. The idea of gender being binary is a very recent thing. And the idea of gender roles is a very, very recent thing. Not only is it a very recent thing, but the idea of gender roles has actually changed quite a bit. Heels and pink and velvet and lace, these things, and makeup, these things were all masculine products before they were feminine products, right? So there's a lot of other stuff out there that you're just not really that aware of. The idea that there are only two biological sexes and that there are only two genders is actually really only like 100 to 150,000 or 150 years old. Our first transitioning operation, our first operation to actually transition somebody from one gender or one biological sex to another biological sex is in 1898, right? 1890s. So the idea that you can only be one of two genders or one of two sexes is actually very, very recent, right? And the idea that our gender roles are what they are is very recent. The greatest warrior grave that we have ever found in Scandinavia was female. The vast majority of warrior graves that we have found across the globe are actually female. The Neanderthals, gender diaphorism, the females are larger than the males. Hunter gatherers, women hunted more than they gathered. Like there is the understanding that hunter gatherers were mainly hunters, not gatherers, because you can get all your gather nutrients needed from the stomach contents of the animals, the herbivores that you kill. So our idea of what it's supposed to be is extremely, extremely recent. And the reason that we're talking about all of this, and I've been here for a little bit longer than I wanted to anyway, so I'm probably going to get off, but I'm going to go into it. So, Rilo, I am globally mixed. I don't have an own race. You think my phenotype dictates my genotype, in which you are extremely incorrect. My phenotype does not dictate my genotype. And it's really weird to me why many people would double down on, I mean, I get why white supremacists double down on the theory of race because it says that they're better than everybody else. But why anybody else would double down on the theory of race is just amazing and amusing to me. Why would you think that I'm more intelligent than you? Because you think I'm white. Why would you think that because you think I'm white, I'm better at something than you might be? That's not acceptable. It was not acceptable when it was created and is not acceptable now. Okay? Not acceptable. So, because I am not going to be here long and because the question was asked, why? Why am I doing this? I want you to know that biologically we are nurturing and communal as a species, and I can scientifically prove that we are nurturing and communal as a species, right? Biologically, we have what we call mandatory midwifery in our childbirth. We must have assistance in our childbirth because of the shape of our head, the shape of our shoulders, and the pelvic outlet. We have to be turned twice as we're being born. And that's to get the head through the pelvic outlet and then to get the shoulders through the pelvic outlet. Okay. So we have to have somebody help us. This means that we must have community. Okay. This is a biological fact that is shown through paleoanthropology, that is agreed upon by all paleoanthropologists. We have mandatory midwifery as a species, our species, and we therefore must have community. Our species also has 5 life stages from neonate to adulthood. Okay. Genotype and phenotype. Phenotype is what I look like on the outside. Genotype is the genes within my genes, my family lines, what I inherited. So biologically, we must have community to even give birth to our children. To raise our children from neonate to adulthood, we have 5 life stages. We're the only species that has ever had 5 life stages. Every other species on this planet, they might not even have more than one life stage. Some of them don't even fucking neonate. Look at a snake. It breaks out of its egg and it goes, right? The other species that has the longest life stages or the longest time between neonate and fully functioning adult is elephants, and this is 5 years. For us, our time from neonate to fully formed, developed brain, adulthood, is 25 years currently. So each of these periods of time are a period of time where our brain is learning a vast amount of knowledge. Think of a neonate to toddler, like the vast amount of knowledge that you're learning in that space and that time. It takes 2 years for us to learn how to eat on our own, how to talk, how to walk, how to shit in a toilet. It takes a couple of years for us to do that. By this time, every other species is already running, right? By this time, no other species needs mama. Okay. So we must have nurture of our children from neonate to adult for that child to survive. You cannot pump, pump, dump, and walk away. That is not species continuation. Everybody thinks that our thing here is propagation of species. Let's all have babies. The thing is if you just have sex with somebody and walk the fuck away, that does not ensure the survival of your child. Therefore, that is not the propagation of your species, right? So we must have nurture from all biological sexes and all genders to raise a child from neonate to adult. Even today, it takes 5 or 6 people to raise your child. It takes 5 or 6 people because somebody has to watch your baby when you're going to work, even if you're a single parent. Somebody has to provide the job. Somebody else had to do all the farming, and somebody else had to transport the food to the store that you have to go and pick up the food at. So it takes multiple people even today. And yet when we look back 30, 40, 50, 100,000 years ago, we're looking at communities that must have a minimum of at least 30 people. And the reason that they must have a minimum of at least 30 people is you need a minimum of 10 people to go hunting. Otherwise, you're going to end up dead and you're not going to kill that predator. You need at least 5 people to go out and gather anything you're doing, from water to reeds for basketry. You need several different people to be watching around you and making sure that the predators aren't going to attack you. And while you're doing all of that, you need to make sure that the infant is back home crying in the cave instead of crying out here and attracting predators. So you need roughly 30 different people to raise a child from neonate to adulthood. So biologically, our species, Homo sapiens sapien, must have nurture and must have community. These are things that are innate to us. They are things that are only within us. We are the only species on the planet currently that has mandatory midwife assist childbirth. The only other species that ever has is Neanderthal. And we are the only species on the planet that has 5 life stages from neonate into adult, 25-year span. Because we must have nurture and we must have community. And you look around you and there is no nurture and there is no community in the world that you live in today. The vast majority of us who have healthy thought processes are depressed. The vast majority of us that have healthy reactions are anxious and depressed. This is a healthy reaction to a traumatic, toxic environment. And we currently live in an toxic environment that discourages community, that discourages nurturing, that discourages any care of each other. Now, they do this so they can maintain control over you. The narcissistic God kings are still here after 10,000 years, and they form your government today. They almost all have narcissistic personality disorder or some other fucking form of the dark triad. They don't give a flying about you, and all they're doing is telling you to hate your next door neighbor, or hate the immigrants, or hate the houseless, or hate the indigenous, or hate the people who are Black descendants of slaves within the United States. They're telling you to hate everybody else, because if you can hate anybody else, then you're not going to attack them. Then you're not going to overthrow them. And they can maintain control over you, and they can hoard. They can exploit. And they exploit you until there is nothing left to exploit out of you. And then they leave you on the street as the houseless and make you something else for everybody else to hate. because we live in a society that does not encourage nurture, that does not encourage community. And because most of us are very depressed because of this, because again, we are innately nurturing, we are innately communal, these are biological drivers for us. When we are living in a space that is the antithesis to our biology, that says that the things that are important to us as humanity is not okay, then we end up depressed, anxious, harming ourselves, hiding out in our house because we know people are going to attack us, right? This is a healthy reaction. There's nothing wrong with you. You are seeing the world for how it is. You are understanding what is going on. And therefore, not only is there nothing wrong with you, but you are a necessary part of our species survival and moving forward. You are a necessary part of our species making changes. You are a necessary part to get us to where we need to be. We have only been violent for 10,000 years. We've only believed in owning property for 10,000 years. We've only dehumanized other beings for 10,000 years. We have 290,000 years of our existence before that, where we were nonviolent, where we were nurturing, where we were communal, where we took care of each other, and where we didn't have narcissistic God kings trying to destroy us, right? So this is not us. This is what we are convinced we are. This is not us. This is what you have been told you are and indoctrinated into. And I do know this. Again, all of my sources and all of my evidence is on my website. I do know this. I do know that we've only been violent for 10,000 years because archaeology states that and anthropology states that scientifically, right? So, our very first advent into a stratified society based on Western-based monocrop agriculture is 10,000 years old. It is the city of Angazal in Amman, Jordan. It caused climate destruction in 300 years. It took a fertile valley to a desert wasteland in 300 years because it robbed it of all of its nutrients. When we are living in disconnect from the world around us, not only the other humans, but the environment around us, the biome that we all subsist in, when we are living in disconnect from that, it creates loneliness, depression. It creates the heartache and the pain that we're all in. When men are taught that they can't talk and express their emotions, men start unaliving themselves at high rates. The suicide rate for young men in the United States is astronomical, and it is that way because they are taught that they can't share their thoughts or share their emotions. Okay? So when we realize that this is toxic and our bodies are reacting to this toxicity in such a painful manner, that means that we are awake, that we are seeing what's going on, which means that we are necessary to create change and return us to a space of co-connection within the biome, right? To return us to a space that is together. This entire live is being streamed at the same time on the YouTube inwitaord.com, or just inwitaord. Sorry, the website's inwitaord.com. It's being streamed at the same time. You can go back and watch the whole live. I am getting ready to leave, so I'm probably not going to go over all of everything again. I'm just trying to close down. But the whole live is there. We've talked about many different things, most of them having to do with paleoanthropology and humanity and our human history. So when we are the people who are feeling that depression, the people who are feeling that anxiety, the people who are having the problems with that, it is because we are having a healthy reaction to an unhealthy environment. Now, most of us believe that our worth is wrapped up in what we are providing for other people. My wife is my wife. She's mine. She belongs to me. My children are my children. They're mine. They belong to me. My job is what makes me worthy. If I can go out and I can work 40 hours a week and I can get a arbitrary paper, right? Then I'm worthy. If I am exploitable to everybody around me, then I am worthy. And when I stop being exploitable to everybody around me, then I stop being worthy, right? Most of us today are indoctrinated into this thought process because the entire society is indoctrinated into this thought process that your only worth is what you can be exploited out of. You are not worthy because of what you can be exploited. Your worth is the fact that you breathe. Your worth is the fact that you are here. Your worth is the fact that you are aware of the toxicity around you. Your worth comes from being alive. Your worth is this, just sitting here, just breathing. Inwita Ord is my YouTube. We are all worthy. We all have a great deal of worth. And when we are looking around us in depression and anxiety because the environment around us is toxic, your worth doubles. Because it is only people who can see the problem who can fix the problem. And if you are living in this pain because you see the problem, then you are needed to fix the problem. Okay. So the answer is land back globally. The answer is returning tending and governance to Indigenous people so that the environment around us can be healed. The land back, or the thought process of returning to an animistic thought process where everybody is a part of the biome, everybody belongs, and everybody is worthy just by being here, is the counteraction to a society that is led by narcissists who want to exploit you for all your worth, right? That think that by making supremacy a thing, that by making certain groups better than other groups and making you hate everybody else, that they can maintain control, right? So these are the answers. They're a long way away and we're working on them, right? It starts with understanding, and it starts with working to understand your own self-worth and help other people see their self-worth is not caught up in what they can be exploited for. And as we are all sitting here dealing with massive amounts of depression and anxiety because we are dealing with an extremely toxic environment, what I ask of you today is to know your worth, to give yourself grace. What I ask of you today is to understand that you yourself are worthy just by being here. You are necessary for me. You are necessary for our world. And the grace that you have been giving everybody else around you is the grace that you need to give yourself. I love the rain. The rain is one of my favorite things. So that's why I'm talking today. That's what I want you guys to know. That's the point of all of this. Your worth is just by breathing. And what you're feeling right now is a healthy response to an unhealthy environment. And your understanding of that is what will change that environment, will change this for the better. And understanding that we are nurturing and communal and creative at our base, right? So that when you are nurturing somebody else and you are part of a community and you are using your creativity, your heart soars. So I am going to go. There's like 300 people here. It's 7 over on YouTube. Hi. But I do have so much that I need to do today. So I do need to get out of here. I might not be back again until Monday, but I'll do it again on Monday. And again, all of my lives are co-streamed on my YouTube channel. So there's several prior lives that go over any, really all of this stuff is stuff I've gone over several different times. So if you're looking for more information, that is absolutely there, and you can just sit and listen to it. I will be back probably early next week. I've got a bunch of stuff, or maybe Sunday. I've got a bunch of stuff going on over the next few days with family. I want everybody to please take care in this time, to please remember to give yourself grace, and to please remember that you are necessary to our species continuation in a time when our species is facing mass extinction because half of our species is committing atrocities, right? So you are necessary to the survival of our species. And because you are necessary to the survival of our species, giving yourself grace and remembering that and loving yourself, give yourself the grace and the love that you give to everybody else, because we all do, right? Give yourself that grace and that love. That's important. Take care of yourself until I see you again, because I want you to all be here when I come back. Um, and yeah, I think that's it for today. Absolutely. And I'll give you the reminder every time you need it, because it is necessary. Much love, everybody. I love all of you. I love humanity. We are all together in this, right? We'll take care of it. And much love to the movement forward and to giving yourself grace. Remember that you are loved, right? Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And I will see you again shortly. If I can figure out how to work a phone, because anybody who's been around a while knows that I suck at that. Thank you so much, YouTube. I see that there's like 7 of you over there, which I think is the most we've had on YouTube so far. So yay! I will see you guys soon. And again, there are the other lives on there if you'd like to watch them or go back and watch this live. Take care of yourself, and thank you so much for being there and listening to me. Have a great day.